Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Burch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. Guess what? Emmy is still here, but this is Alex Gartner, your guest co-host for today as we open up our pre-book tour series on our book. It was terrible, Emmy. This is why you're the host and not me.
As Alex said, welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Burch, and I'm joined by my co-author and dear friend, Alex Gartner. How's it going, Alex?
I'm great. How are you, Emmy? Thank you for having me again.
You did a great job interviewing and opening the interview. I can't wait for the listeners to hear this. We're officially kicking off our pre-release book tour. What's the book called?
The book is called Behind the Choir, an executive guide to magnifying your organization's value and potential. That's sort of just the working title, but
it is the working title. If you haven't already done so, episode 74 on the podcast features Alex and myself giving you the 411 on the book. It hasn't gone to the publisher yet, so things might change. But what you're hearing today is the first of 3 really important interviews. The book is broken into 3 sections. Each section features an expert in the field answering questions and contributing to the book as a whole. We kick it off with section 1, all about communicating your value, demonstrating your vision in order to raise funds and in order to raise awareness, and infusing diversity into the absolute DNA of your organization. There is no one better on the planet to talk to about than Dr. Phillip Shoultz of Vocal Essence.
Yes, so Dr. Phillip Shoultz is the Associate Artistic Director of Vocal Essence, which is based up in Minnesota. And that organization's been around for a long time. But Phillip started a younger organization, a youth choir within that organization called Vocal Essence Singers of This Age. And it is just this really neat program serving, I think he said, around between 10 and 15 schools in Minnesota. And it's just, well, you're going to have to hear from him. It's just a really incredible program.
In this conversation, you'll hear how Dr. Shoultz found choir and what his communicative value is, both of the organizations he works for and himself within choir. You will walk away with tips for how you can also infuse this into your day-to-day organization, whether you're with a school or with a community group or with a church. Communicating that value, finding the space and the depth to authentically be the organization you dream of being. I hope this one inspires you as we kick off our pre-release book tour with Dr. Phillip Shoultz. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are joined by co-host and co-author Alex Gartner and a great interviewee, Dr. Phillip Shoultz. Hello, Dr. Shoultz.
Hello, how are you all doing today?
We are fantastic. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes.
Well, I'm thrilled to be invited. It's always good to be in your company.
Well, we are thrilled to have this conversation. This was a really easy, when we were brainstorming the book, and we knew the first section was all about value and vision and really the DNA of an organization and how we communicate that. We immediately knew that you were going to be the person to talk to about that because you and your organization and what you do, it's just so evident what you value and how you communicate that with the people both in your rehearsals and outside. So for those who don't know you, tell the listeners, who is Dr. Phillip Shoultz and what do you do?
Yeah, well, the who am I will take longer than we have time for. But to say that I show up in many ways and in many spaces as a father, as a musician, lover of food and sports and things like that. But one who really cares deeply about bringing people together through the gift of creating song, creating music together, sharing artistic experiences, both co-created and collaborative, to inspire us to also inspire change in the world around us. And so my primary role is as the Associate Artistic Director of Vocal Essence, which is a 53-year-old nonprofit arts organization based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, founded by Philip Brunel, who's still our artistic director 53 years later. And it's an organization that really believes in using the power of singing to create community connections, to embrace difference, to amplify voices that aren't often heard on the concert stage, and to really make a difference in our community.
What I love is you can articulate that mission You can articulate really specific points of that mission in easy conversation.
Yeah.
Can't wait to unpack that further. How do you ask your singers, do they read the mission statement? How do you communicate that mission or that vision with your singers?
Well, we do. And let me say, the funny thing about it is right now, this very moment, we're in the midst of reviewing our mission, vision, and values with our staff. So we have an 11-member staff, and I've been leading these conversations each week, working through our old mission statement. And what I shared with you there was really a paraphrase of the new language that's emerging based on unpacking what the current statement is. Because truth be told, if I'm being really transparent, I share with them and I dared them all say, which one is our mission statement? Which one is our vision statement? Which one are our values? And people would get them confused. They were all jumbled up because they said a lot of the same things. And so it's like, that's a problem. We need to go back and really clarify and simplify. So just to be transparent, it is important that you can articulate exactly what the mission and then how you live out that mission based on the values, which is where it all begins with for me. So with the Vocal Essence Singers of This Age, which is the youth choir that I created or founded 5 years ago, we do this intentionally at the beginning of each season. In fact, I wish I was in the other room. I could show you the Post-it notes. I'm keeping 3M in business because each week we're using 10 to 12 sheets in small groups, talking about the ways that we are going to engage and be in community with each other. And what they settled on, this is a high school choir, high school community youth choir. They come from about 15 to 20 different schools around the Twin Cities. When they were founded, the stated purpose was to create a space where students could bring all of themselves and their communities into a new community to learn from each other and to grow together, embracing difference. And they put flesh on those bones now by saying that VE Soda exists to give students opportunities to acquire the skills to be agents of social change. And we do this through the lens of creativity, collaboration, and communication. And each of those are fleshed out. You know, creativity infuses everything that we do in the artistic product, but also in the process as well as the product. Collaboration, the way that we create our art, the way that we talk about it. Communication, leadership skills, all the other 21st century skills there as well. And so it's been really wonderful to kind of come alongside them and guide this process using language that they can share so that when we reflect on something, we can see if it really lands and sticks with them.
I love the use of their language. Alex, pop in.
Yeah, this is just so incredible. You know, we had for you listeners, we have this set of questions that we were going to ask Dr. Shoultz, and then he sort of just answered about 2 of them that we were about to do. So we're going to sort of redirect here. Phillip, you talked about how in Vocal Essence Singers of This Age, kind of the values and the mission that you instill and promote amongst your singers. Let's throw that up in the air a little bit. Give us your feelings about the value of choir, the act of singing in a group as a whole.
Yeah, the act of singing in a group is one of the most transformative and vulnerable experiences at the same time. And I speak as someone who's sung in a choir, I think since I was 3 years old, starting in a missionary Baptist church choir in Columbus, Georgia, and then moving through a boy choir environment there, school choirs, all the way through church choirs, you know, and then of course what we did, you know, to get our degrees and to be where we are. And it is at the same time, the music itself has this layer, right? We're learning often about cultures different from our own or profound texts that make us really think about how we engage with the world around us. So there's that component there that is transformative. But there's also this other component of vulnerability because there are people next to you who hear your voice, and you have to be willing to share that freely and then see how the voices work together in a very organic way. I think we get into trouble when we do a lot of the things that, you know, used to be used to help create blend and things like that, right? Where people were sacrificing themselves for the sound. And we've learned better now. We know that it's a different way that we can create uniformity of sound without sacrificing self. So for me, the value of choir is people can come in of all ages, any of my choirs, and I want this to be a space where they can be brave, where they can have the courage to say what they need to say in love, knowing that it will be received with love. And while we may disagree, we can communicate and find where the differences are so we come to some commonality, common ground. We may not always, again, agree, but we come to common ground and know where we stand. And that helps us to work well together. So that's it, that brave space that allows them to be safe, to express who they are. That's what choir is for me, a bunch of people who feel like they can bring all of themselves, all of the ways that they identify to the forefront to create something larger than each of us. And think about it. There aren't many spaces like that in the world for us, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's so valuable.
Yeah. I mean, so many head nods, everything you're saying. We the three of us have this common experience. We grew up with singing. We have this inherent love, this history of experiences that sort of have shaped us, not just as musicians, but as individuals. And so in your work, how do you communicate all of that value that you just shared to someone who doesn't have that same shared experience? Where is the connection that we need to build? Where's that bridge that we build with them?
I think that's a fabulous question, Alex, because we know that more and more now as leaders of independent choruses and frankly, school choirs also, but independent choruses and organizations, entrepreneurial leaders, we are going to engage both as performers, our participants, their family members, our constituents and donors and patrons, right? People who don't have that experience of singing as being life-giving. Mm-hmm. Some of them will have had a negative experience where someone told them they couldn't sing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so for me, I think it starts before the music with the environment. Mm. Yes. Like the music is so important, and that's the end game. That's the vehicle that we use, right? The tool that we use and we develop together. But I believe we have to start first with that environment of a value of saying this is a space that if someone talking to someone who's giving money or thinking about giving money, to be able to articulate the people in this room, they find out more about themselves. They develop confidence. They're able to communicate and articulate ideas. They're able to work together with others. And the way we do this is through the gift of singing together. And we use singing to spark conversation. We use singing to spark opportunities to create things. I'm fond of using the music to then, okay, let's create a visual scene. Everyone get in the room and you all in your small groups create a silent movie for this text that we just sang, right? There's all these creative things that we can do, right, that allow them to use their imagination and bring meaning to the stuff that's in the music. None of that can happen if it's not an environment where they can show up and they know that when they show up, someone is going to be there listening and receiving and accepting them where they are and listening to them and learning from them and growing with them. So that's key to me, I think, is environment. I come back to, we are creating an environment for possibilities. Mm. And I found that has landed well with people who are not musical to understand this is a space where anything is possible. And once you've experienced one space where anything is possible, you can transfer that, right? Like one of your mentors, Cliff Mattson, everything connects to everything, right? We can create those connection points for them so that they can transfer that to other parts of their life. That's sticky. And that speaks to anyone in my mind.
I couldn't agree more. So when now you've built this connection with people outside your organization, once the relationship is established, I'm interested in hearing from your people specifically that support your program. Mm-hmm. What do they say when they're asked why? When someone asks them, why do they support you? What is their response?
There's so many layers to that. And some of it for Vocal Essence, I'll say, is it's interesting. I can speak to this both from the legacy of the program, 53 years, the organization rather, 53-year organization, but also the freshness and the vitality of this new 5-year-old program that has really made headwaves and has moved the whole organization forward in a variety of ways, programmatically, the ways that we engage with difference, dimensions of difference and diversity, et cetera. From a legacy standpoint, once you've created relationship, there's equity that's built. And this is the equity of, the equity of I trust you. And you have a little more latitude to be innovative. And I'm going to support you because you've proven me right before. I bet on you and you delivered. So now you have more latitude to do more things. And that's important to note. You don't get that right up front when you're just starting an organization and you're just building those relationships. You really have to be transparent about what you're going to do. You have to stick to it. If anything changes, you have to go back and tell them exactly what's changing and why it's changing, right? Over communicate in that sense, or as one of my mentors will say, just communicate. It's not over communicate, just communicate those changes there and stay in touch. Philip Burnell is great about that, in that he is always staying in touch with people. He doesn't want them to get too far away from you or to not hear from us for so long. Even if we're not asking for anything, it's just a little note to say what's up so that we stay front of mind. So this sense of communicating and staying in touch with the journey, letting them follow that journey of our story and telling that story authentically gives you this opportunity to create equity. And once you've had equity, that's when you can go back with new and bold ideas and seek their advice. And maybe they give you other people to connect to, or maybe they will be people who will support you in one way or another. We're the beneficiaries of that as a legacy organization. With the Singers of This Age, as a fresh, newer ensemble and arm of the organization, what it has allowed us to do is to really speak to, and this was before the pandemic and before the racial reckoning being front and center of the last 19 months, it was able to speak to a lot of the things that people were silently saying they wanted to see in our art form. And so many organizations fall into the trap of what I call programming by funder. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is, funders are looking for more colors of faces on stage, more diversity. So I'm going to create this program to attract this funding. And that's a slippery slope, right? Because if you're just creating for a surface reaction and there's no foundation and values that you can articulate, something's going to trip you up and the facade is going to come off at some point, and you're going to have to figure things out the hard way. It might work, but it's a lot harder than what we did, which was to state our goals, to be true to it. And even when it didn't make sense, when people couldn't see it, to keep explaining it to them. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is what the result we anticipate will be. This is the logic model philosophy here. You know, the idea of creating your logic model, your program theory, right? What's your theory of change? What's the change that you want to see happen? Walk it back. What are the steps to get to that change? And it's going to change, pun intended there. Those steps are going to move and shift. But if you keep shifting around with it and you're staying true to some value systems that are in place, you have a consistent story to tell. And then people see the authenticity or the sincere nature of what you're doing. And I find that they respond to that as well. And that's why VE Soda, as we call the Singers of This Age, has worked, because they see that in every phase of that program, we are true to what we said we're going to do. One word, I'd say, tell the truth, right? Know your truth. I have a hoodie that says live your truth. And that's what it comes back to. People will fund you or they will support you in other ways when you live your truth. Even if they don't believe it 100%, they will be compelled by your vision. And if they believe in you, they will support you just because of that equity again, that relationship that you built.
You've given us a lot of tips here. You've talked about building the relationship and establishing the the things that you can communicate. You've talked about collaboration and creativity and this whole concept of equity. Can you give us an example as you've touched on diversity already? Diversity has to play a role in your organization because you've brought it up organically in conversation. Can you explain to us, what are you telling people when it comes to diversity, when people are asking you to program for diversity? What are you saying, and how do you remain authentic and true? What does it look like from your DNA perspective?
Yeah, that's a complex one, because that one of the ways I show up in the world is as a Black man who's in this field, right, which has for many, many years involved performing musics of different cultures, particularly music organic to my culture, the spiritual, the Negro spiritual. We know it hasn't always been done in the most healthy ways. I still think I'd rather have that than no performance at all. And we're at a place where we're learning and growing, right? It goes back to recognizing one thing, and this is a new recognition for me too. Diversity for me is dimensions of difference. It's acknowledging and embracing dimensions of difference. It's that simple. And we often get caught of just thinking of diversity as the amount of melanin in someone's skin. And we know that diversity are all those different dimensions, whether it's social, economic, gender, expansiveness, abilities, or disabilities, as someone would say there, right? The faith perspectives, all the ways that we identify. There are so many choirs in rural parts of the country or in parts of the country that are urban that appear to be more homogenous by melanin and skin color, that ignore so many facets of diversity amongst their participants and their constituents. And what I keep telling people now when I consult and talk with them is, if you ignore that difference and diversity, there's no way you're ready to embrace the other diversities that show up more visibly. So in this concert that we did Saturday, some of the feedback, because we always get reviews, always do evaluation, right? Always have people tell you how you did, whether you want to hear it or not. You need to hear it and you need to read it. There's always something to learn. And it's fascinating to me how one of our pieces has this wonderful co-created rap section. And the person who does the rap is one who presents as a male. And so every person on there, fantastic young male rapper, awesome young male rapper, young male rapper. And I want to say, this person does not identify as male. We make assumptions, right, because of the way people look, and we ignore getting to the core, the surface. And so coming back to wherever you are, how I talk about diversity and how we talk about in our organization is to really begin to acknowledge that it's let me back up 1 second. By saying that we acknowledge the difference of everyone in the room, and we want to do our best to engage with that difference, we can more fully reflect who we are, the sum of all the individual parts to this ensemble that you have on stage. And so it's hard work, because there's times that we get it wrong. There's times that we miss things. There's times that we speak words that we want to take back, and we have to have language to be able to say, let me walk that back, or I'm sorry, let me do that again, right? And there's this, again, equity built in where the receiver receives that and is appreciative of you working on it. That's what diversity is for me and how we talk about it. And that makes it much more rich and much more complex. We've always programmed a lot of music from a lot of composers from different backgrounds, culturally different genders. What we have not done historically in this organization so well is to always go beneath the surface of inviting the performer to come perform with us. What about going a step deeper into the relationship of how this performer got to this place, what's in their background, and learning those stories so that we connect to them as a person through their experiences? And I think that's the key thing is are you creating spaces for people to share their experiences? That's engaging with diversity for me, whether it's with our programming now, which this fall concert was called Hope Lives Here. It featured Bernstein Chichester Psalms. It featured Piazzolla's Four Tangos, but those were not performed together as sets. They were foundational linchpins throughout this 80-minute through composed, as I call it, program, which was a reflection on the 18 months of the pandemic. Mm. And I went through Bernstein and looked at the text. It's all Psalms, right? Biblical, but you can see in the text what we've experienced during the pandemic. There's gratitude early on. Psalm 23, there's lament, and there's this sense of what in memoriam, all the lives that we lost due to COVID, but also due to racial reckoning. And then there's right away the why do the nations rage so furiously together, right? There's all of this in the music that we sing. Sometimes we peel back the layer and then we put up the lens of what we're experiencing. We create this space for conversation where we share experiences. And that's where the diversity comes out and we get to engage with difference. And we're only better when we engage with difference. When we minimize and we try to make everything the same, then it might look good, but it's not going to last, right? It maybe 10 years, but it's not going to last. Something's going to happen and disrupt. When we try to amplify everyone's voices and we really get to that heart of engaging with the difference, it's messier, but some beautiful things happen because people feel like I can see myself here. So one pithy thought to share, we select for difference, but we develop for conformity oftentimes. We select people because they're different, but then they get there and we're like, no, we do it this way. This is how we do it here, right? Conformity. And I want people to think of changing your mindset. Select for difference, develop for that individuality too, right? Accept all of that difference. And make that be the new kind of group norm that you find together.
I love how it so perfectly wraps back to what you were saying in the beginning. It starts with relationship and environment. And you even in that example tapped on what you were saying about vowels, our old school way of doing vowels. It is an exact like image of what you're saying here. Do you communicate these things as well with, you obviously are communicating it within your rehearsal spaces, but do you communicate that outside? Like, would people at your in your audience at that fall concert, they know the depth of the diversity and the depth of the value within the organization?
That's a great question. And I would say yes and no. Those who are close to the organization and who read the publications that we put out, our singing telegram, things like that, would know that we're talking about this internally. A casual concert goer, and we see this sometimes in the evaluation too, like I can read and see they're not engaging with what we're doing yet. They're responding to what they see on stage. One of the case in point, this is an easy one. We made a shift and the singers led this. This is the adult choir, to go from having prescribed uniforms to just being a concert black that reflects who you are, right? And many organizations are doing this now. But there were about 10 or 12 comments about, oh, the lack of uniformity in the uniforms is distracting. The different colors of black was bothering me. And I'm like, that's fine. I receive that, but that's a minimal concern for me for all of the positive gains of allowing singers to show up the way they want to show up. Frankly, one singer was like, I can breathe now. It wasn't even about identity. It was just like, I can breathe. I wear something I can breathe in. This feels good, right? And so it made me think, oh, I missed a moment at the beginning of the concert welcome where I could have said, and you'll notice we have a new uniform this year, and here's why we're not uniform, right? Sometimes it is having to communicate that. Again, there's that word again, just saying it and thinking it through of what they need to hear and why. Other times, I do think we're called just to put it out there and let people sit with it and wonder. And then you hope for that chance to re-engage with it later. You know, I made a choice that some would call controversial. I had two Black teenagers who identify as female sing the solo in the second movement of the Bernstein. And he wrote that for a boy. It was an intentional decision that I didn't say explicitly, but anyone who knows the tradition, hopefully they're engaging with the why. And sometimes that's just enough for me, Emmy and Alex. It's just to know that they're engaging with it, hoping that maybe there's a post-concert talk back where then those things come up. We didn't have one this time because of COVID, but normally that's where those things come up, or we'll do a video afterwards to respond to some of the questions that come up. And then you hope that people will engage with that so that they get a sense of our why. Yeah.
I love this.
I love that.
That engagement factor. No, sorry, Alex. This is so good, Phillip. That engagement factor is huge. And you've given us so many ways to engage. The forms and surveys at the end of a concert, the talk backs at the end, knowing when to say something and when to let it sit, and then following up. And then what a great idea for doing a video with some of the commonly asked questions. But ultimately, you don't have to act as long as you are authentically true to a deeper value and purpose. Man, Phillip, this is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. Alex, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's okay. I was thinking as you were talking in that last segment, Phillip, of just how grateful I am that you are the first person to open up the first section of the book, because so much of what you've shared in just these last 30 minutes is echoed in so many ways throughout the stuff we've already written. And I think it speaks to, and you not having read the entire book, of course,
right.
But this interview, it speaks to the core importance of the value that choral singing brings and the environment that it creates. And so, as we wrap up here, I'm wondering what's that one little nugget that you would like to leave our listeners and our future readers about the importance of choral value?
Yeah, the one nugget that I'll say is just like the world itself, and this is my belief of the world and of us as humans, we are always evolving and ever changing. And we get in trouble when we try to freeze frame things and hang on to it. We can be nostalgic, right? But choral music was not meant to exist in a period of time. Choral music, like anything else, it's been there and it's meant to keep evolving and having this ebb and flow, right? And the expansiveness of possibilities. And so I think that's my nugget. I used this word earlier, but I want to come back to it. When you're living into your truth, I think that means you're living into possibility. People like to use the word innovate and things like that, and that's great. You can't innovate if you aren't letting your mind conceive of what is possible. And so I would just say to everyone, as you read this book, and again, yes, I haven't read it, but knowing Alex, knowing Emmy, I know where your hearts are. I know where your values are. I know the experiences you've had, the training you've had. It's no surprise to me that we're kind of simpatico in the way that we feel about these things, right? So it's going to be a good and necessary read and one of those pillar books. And I'm so glad that you wrote it. So now I have something to refer to. People like, you should write a book. It's already been written. I'll just do the interviews and talk about it, right? But no, on a serious front, I think when you read this book and you hear this interview, go back and play it back, and the other interviews that follow, we have to be able to vision things outside of what we've already seen and to give ourselves space to do that. Because when we give ourselves space to lean into those possibilities that we haven't seen come into reality, new things will emerge. Our art form will be enlarged, both in the participants, the audiences, and the impact, but also in the art that we create. And that's necessary for the survival of it. And it doesn't take away from everything that came before. And I must make sure I say that. It doesn't mean we're not doing, the stuff that we love, the Lassos and the Beethovens and the Mozarts and the, Schütz and all that kind of stuff, right? All of that stuff has a place, but we just need to enlarge the possibilities. So that's what I'll leave us with.
I love it. Space and depth. What a great conversation. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Oh my gosh. That was just an incredible conversation. That man is just so full of these incredible nuggets of wisdom that start small, but then they just emerge into this incredibly deep conversation. Right at the very beginning, I just loved when we talked about the value of choir. He said, we're creating an environment of possibility. And that is a message that can be understood and appreciated and supported by so many people. I'm just thrilled he's opening this book. Oh my gosh.
I am too. I love that he infused so much authenticity into the conversation while also giving tips and ideas and suggestions, such as always asking for feedback, having those talkbacks after a concert, putting videos and he said they have emails and documents, putting the information out there so you're constantly, what he said, communicating.
Yeah, he mentioned engaging with the why. He was talking about that in the context of, sitting in an audience and asking yourself, why is that? Why is this looking or sounding differently? But I think that's a really good way to sum up kind of the whole essence of his thoughts. It's when we talk about value, we talk about mission, we talk about engaging our singers, we talk about educating and teaching and building audiences. It's about engagement, obviously, but what is that engagement with? Sometimes it's with music. Most of the time it's with music, but then there's other people in that too. And that engagement is the why. Why are they here? Why are we doing this? What's the point? And thinking about it in that way makes that conversation, those types of conversations, a little bit more easy to understand, I think.
I felt so inspired after this conversation, and I love your analogy. It was these little nuggets he would drop, and they would just bloom into these gorgeous flowers. I'm inspired to go do some editing. How about you?
Yeah, me too.
This was so good. Hey, thank you so much for listening to today. I hope you know that whatever you are doing, sitting in your car, in your driveway, waiting to go inside because you wanted to hear the very end of the episode, yeah? I hope you know that you matter. We all know that music matters, especially choir and how we communicate that value to both those in our room, in our audiences, and in the world at large. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.